I wanted to review with you guys the passage of Cassius's speech to Brutus for some of the elements of persuasion that you guys were doing on Friday. This time I want to also really add the emphasis of how not only do these elements of persuasion exist in here, but also other literary devices are helping them to do their job. These are not the only ones that you could have found in here, but obviously these are ones that I'm using as examples. You might want to review to sort of see how your literary devices and how your elements of persuasion compare. So we're still seeing Cassius try to persuade Brutus to oppose Caesar right here. And in this section, Brutus hears the shout, and Cassius immediately starts speaking of Caesar. Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. This is a very interesting image that we might talk about. The image of the Colossus here actually referred to the Colossus of Rhodes, which was a giant statue, almost 30 feet tall, which was really, really high in that day and age. So his reference to Caesar as a literal giant is one thing that he's trying to demonstrate with this imagery right here. And he also adds to that we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves, almost comparing them to something small like mice or bugs, if we wanted to add that as a comparison, a metaphor, or a simile. Then we could see that as well. Now, the trick is, what does this imagery actually do for us in terms of our elements of persuasion? I think this is a good appeal right here to pathos. So, number one, we see this image of Caesar, which is meant to make us feel oppressed by his giant stature. Likewise, it makes us feel ashamed of our small stature or weak. Sense of fear, sense of weakness, and even sense of shame. Anyone who would be told that they were in this sort of situation would probably feel upset that they were being compared again to such a small thing in the face of a giant right here, rather than standing up for their own stature, their own rights. Men sometimes are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. This is a very famous line. You guys probably know it from the Fault in Our Stars line right here that John Green viciously stole. So this one right here, I would perhaps note as being logos. The fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. This is him essentially making a sort of reasonable statement. Whose fault is it that Caesar has grown so great? It's not fate. It's not the stars that have determined this. It's their own faults for allowing Caesar to gain this particular power right here. So that right there is the reasoning, basically, that Cassius is demonstrating for his, opposition to Caesar, and especially to his desire to act. He no longer wants to be the one who's basically choosing to be an underling. Here's an interesting one. Brutus and Caesar, what should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together, yours is as fair a name, sound them, and it doth become a mouth as well. Weigh 'em, it's as heavy, conjure 'em, Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. This is an interesting little section where he literally talks about the two names. Why is the name Caesar so powerful, so revered? In fact, this is a reference to the way that we still would talk about the emperors of Rome as Caesars, and many of the names of kings and emperors come from the literal name Caesar. Cassius right here is playing off of this. Why should that name be the one that we use with such honor and not Brutus? There's nothing in them essentially that makes them different. He uses some interesting syntax in here. Syntax against sentence structure, punctuation, etc. So he uses basically these rhetorical questions. What should be in that Caesar that is not in Brutus? So that aspect, and we also see him essentially using this pattern of command followed by a comparison, where he says, command, write them together, compare, yours is as fair a name. Command, sound them, comparison, it doth become the mouth just as well. So those syntactical sorts of things right there likewise seem like they're trying to appeal to logos, again essentially showing that there is nothing special about Caesar or his name. There's no reason Brutus should be inferior. So we perhaps would identify this as another example of logos right here. There we go. Now, in all of those, in these next little parts right here, we get to see some ethos pop back up. So, for instance, age, thou art shamed, Rome, thou hast lost the breed of noble bloods. This right here is appealing specifically, again, to this sense of patriotism, this pride in what Rome is. And we might also note the way that the literary devices right here, he's addressing something that's not physically there. If you guys can remember what that one is called when you talk about the different ways actors address people who aren't on stage. If you can remember, this was a rarer one. This was called apostrophe. He addresses basically the spirit of Rome right here. Not physically on the stage, but he's addressing that, again, as a way of appealing to pride in their Roman nature right here. And skipping down a little bit more, here's another interesting one. There was a Brutus once that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king. Right here, he's talking about the original Brutus ancestor, who you guys might remember from the video. The original Brutus was the one who helped drive the first kings out of Rome in the first place right here. This is an interesting literary device we haven't talked much about. Allusion, essentially referencing another work or another historical figure. This one is alluding to the original Brutus ancestor. And obviously it's trying to play on ethos again, trying to draw upon the revered ancestor of Brutus to make him think, what would my ancestors, what would my family have wanted or valued themselves? So these are just a couple of ones that you could have gotten from here. One thing that, again, we're going to be drawing upon more and more through this is this way of connecting literary devices to our elements of persuasion. So pay good and close attention to that and start trying to practice that as you analyze the rest of the play.